It's not okay, but I do forgive you. A few years ago, my friend Amy was sharing this parenting moment with me. Her daughter had said or done something that was hurtful, and Amy responded, it's okay. That's something we often say when we're trying to console the other person, especially our kids, right? It's okay. But her daughter would not have it. What do you mean it's okay? It wasn't okay. You're not supposed to say it's okay. You're just supposed to say that you forgive me. That has stuck with me. I think we had this conversation like 8 years ago, but it stayed with me. I think part of that's because I'm also a parent, and I'm also often tempted to just dismiss what my kiddo did as, no, it's fine, it's okay. It's because we don't want them to feel too bad about it. We want there to be like an appropriately sized reaction. And at the same time, it wasn't okay sometimes. Sometimes it just genuinely wasn't okay, right? Brio sometimes would have these big reactions to things when he was 3. Hit me, Sometimes it hurt. We don't want our kids to be hitting people as a response to not getting their way or, not getting a toy they want, right? So it's not okay. It's not okay for him to hit me. But he does need to know that we're okay, right? That we're fine. Not that the behavior is acceptable, but that we're okay. Which brings me to our story today. We've been going through the book of Acts, which is one of my favorite books. And at this point, a lot has happened. The church continues to grow more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable. It's got some big problems coming up, but it's not quite there yet. And at this point in our story, in Acts 13, Saul, former persecutor of those who are following Jesus, has become a part of the church. And he's over in Antioch, which is, in modern-day Syria today. And that's the community he's worshiping with. This is the same place where the term Christian is used for the first time as a pejorative. The church didn't have an understanding of themselves as being completely apart from Judaism just yet. It's a group within Judaism still. And he's worshiping with other leaders in this church. 2 of the others happen to be Jewish Christians, just like him, using Christian for lack of a better term, followers of Jesus. One of them happens to be Simeon, a black man. He gets this unfortunate nickname. When I lived in Japan, sometimes I was called, the white guy or the foreigner. That happens sometimes. It speaks to the population not being particularly large, but it also speaks to something extremely important that I don't want us to gloss over too easily here. The church has always included people of color since almost day one. Y'all remember a few weeks ago who the first Gentile, that means non-Jewish convert was? The Ethiopian eunuch, a black man from Ethiopia who also occupied a non-binary, or the closest thing to a non-binary gender expression. This is important. Again, for anybody who wants to erase the existence of people of color in our faith tradition and in our scriptures, here they are. yelling at us. They've been here the whole time. And we also have a gentleman from Cyrene. They're all present in this room. They're praying and fasting, which is always the most fun version of spiritual discipline. And in this gathering, they have a nudging from God's Spirit to set aside Saul, who will later become known more popularly as Paul, and Barnabas, a person we've encountered a few times, who has been nicknamed the Encourager, which is such a great name, Barnabas. And they are set aside for what a lot of us think of as essentially the first mission trip. But the way they go about this is a bit different than I think a lot of us would conceive a mission trip being. Because the first stop that they go to when they go into these new towns new towns to them around the Mediterranean, is they go to the local synagogue. Why would they go to the local synagogue? Well, I was brought up to believe like this is a strategy. You invade this place of worship and you disrupt things. But remember, they don't think they're starting a new religion right now. They think that this is in continuity with the Judaism that most of them were raised in. Jesus is many things, but one of those things is a reforming figure. So I think they go to the synagogue because that's where you go if you happen to be Jewish and traveling around the Mediterranean world, right? If you're seeking a place to worship, you go to the place where people are going to worship your God. And as often happens when you have a teacher visiting a synagogue, they get invited to speak. And we're told that Saul comes up, and it sounds like pretty regularly, like this is what he teaches on. He shares kind of this overarching history of his understanding of the history of like Jewish people in the Hebrew Scriptures. And he connects Jesus to it. He sees Jesus as connected to King David in particular. So Jesus isn't like apart from this. Jesus is in continuity with it. But he also sees Jesus as being above King David in his understanding. Because Jesus appears to Saul after Jesus has died. We remember reading that earlier. Saul has this vision and knocks him on his butt, and then he's blinded. But who appears in the vision? It's Jesus. And so he says, well, Jesus must be above King David because Jesus is incorruptible. He's never going to see decay. He's received new life. And so he's advocating also for this view of, like, death is not the end for us either. And he attaches on there as well, when he's speaking at these synagogues, he's attentive to the people who are outside of the walls of those gathered there, the God-fearers. Those are Gentiles who want to worship this God of the Jewish folks, but they've not fully converted. Maybe they didn't get a circumcision. Maybe they can't hold to all the rituals that are associated with it. Or maybe they don't want to. There could be many reasons for being a God-fearer who doesn't sit in the same room as everyone else. But what they have in common is they've not converted fully to Judaism. And so Saul speaks not just to the people in the room, not just the insiders, but the outsiders as well. And he quotes from Isaiah, making this point that God loves not just the people here, but the people out there too. God loves, the Jewish folks who've been so observant, but also for those who aren't, for the non-Jewish Gentile people. This would be good news. Perhaps radical news for the purists, the ones who want to conserve the religious status quo, keep things limited to their ethnic group. But it's good news for everybody else. But then Paul makes this point about forgiveness. And it's more of an emphasis for him than it is for the other preachers in this book of Acts. He tells them that they can be forgiven from God. And he camps out in that. Forgiven of what? Forgiven for the misdeeds that they've done. Forgiven for wrongdoing. Now, Paul's a bit more, well, he's not a universalist. I'm a bit more of a universalist in this way. I believe God is the best parent. So God's not seeking to punish folks into eternity. But Acts and Paul don't necessarily share that view. What they're most concerned with is for folks to know that they are forgiven from God if they want to be. Why does this matter? Why does this matter to Paul? When I think about Paul's story, I don't see a point where Jesus comes down or God speaks to him and says, "Hey, Paul, I forgive you." So why does he make this an emphasis, and such a big emphasis, when he's preaching about his understanding of Jesus and, by extension, of God? When we meet Paul, he is persecuting people. He is complicit in the murder of an individual who's not abiding by his purest religious standards. He has blood on his hands. Then the next time we see Paul, he's on his way to go and do more of that. That's when Jesus appears to him and he's struck blind. And he is blind for a few days until Jesus appears to this man to heal him. And the man has a message that he receives from Jesus. It must be a message of forgiveness, right? No. It's Paul is going to see how much he has to suffer for my sake. That doesn't sound like forgiveness just yet, does it? But this man was on Paul's target list. He's a Christian in the town that Paul has gone to go punish them, to try to dissuade other people from joining this group. And he heals him. And then Paul goes and he lives amongst the same folks that he was seeking to arrest, detain, and murder. And he becomes one of them. In fact, he becomes a teacher amongst them. How did Paul learn of this forgiveness? I think Paul learns of the forgiveness of God from the community of God. And I think that's how most of us learn of forgiveness, isn't it? Sometimes we need to know that God forgives us. But maybe we don't always want to know it. Maybe we don't always want to ask for forgiveness. I mean, that means we have to look at ourselves. We have to reflect on what we've done. And I'm not saying everybody needs to just quake in fear about all of the mistakes they've ever made. But some of us have made some pretty big doozies, haven't we? I have. Shoot. Earlier this week, I'm reflecting on the small little points of neglect that I've made to some phone calls and meetings because I was sick. And I had to play that out in my mind. Am I okay? Are we okay? Is this relationship okay? Like, well, that person knows I'm sick. They're extending grace because that's what you do. That's what you do when you're sick and you have to cancel a meeting, right? We could be so hard on ourselves. So, a few years ago, when I was deconstructing from the conservative evangelicalism I was raised in, I started going to this church called Christ Church in downtown Portland. It doesn't exist anymore. And by this point, I'd done a lot of work. Done a lot of work on myself, done a lot of deconstructing and reconstructing. And part of that work, because I was, for those of you who don't know, a conservative evangelical youth pastor who worked in a lot of, well, in a few new churches. Some of that work included me needing to go back and apologize to the students that I had harmed with my own oppressive teachings, especially our LGBTQIA+ kids, who by this point, most of whom were adults. And I didn't want to do that because, you know, that sucked. I had to face some harm that I had done. And then I realized, like, if I'm going to move past this, and for some of them, if they're going to move past this, I need to be able to say that that was wrong. I don't know if they're going to hear from anybody else that that was wrong. Not from the church that we were a part of, that's for sure. But I had a responsibility in their lives to teach them about the love of God. And I taught them a love of God that had caveats attached to it. And I did that. And I started showing up. And I started advocating and becoming a lot more active. And eventually, Stephanie and I found a new denomination. By this point, you know, we were with the Disciples of Christ and going to Christ Church. And then one day, this person who helps organize First Christian Church's Pride Parade was working with Christ Church, and they said, I think this was like our second Sunday, Giuseppe and Stephanie, so good to see you. I'm glad you came back. Hey, do you want to come with me into our Pride Parade? I had never really thought that was even an option, you know? And we went. And we carried these signs with us, some of us. You could see it up there. That's Adam Phillips holding that sign. Now, what I expected was some rowdy celebration, and there was so much of that. Lots of rowdy celebration. And what I expected was this. I expected the Westminster, Westboro Baptist Church folks. And they were there. They're always somewhere at these things. But they were small. They were a small little group. What I wasn't expecting is that while we walked and we proceeded in the parade, in the march, that people would run up to us and want to take pictures with us and give us hugs. And this is the one that really broke me. And forgive us. Say, I forgive you. That, I hate crying. It's one of the things that I continue to work through. It feels like emotionally throwing up to me. I hate that feeling. And here I am, I'm comfortable arguing with these guys. But to be forgiven, to hear that I'm forgiven for this real crappy behavior, the tears just ran down my face. I was an undignified mess. And it was glorious. It was beautiful. I had spent all of this time showing up, advocating, studying, activating, even apologizing, right? To everyone but God. I was running away from that. There's something that just seems so scary and personal about saying, God, I didn't just harm my students and my friends and my family. I harmed you. And here I am, unasked for, receiving forgiveness from the priesthood of strangers. Sometimes we just need to know that what we did wasn't okay, but that we're forgiven. To forgive someone means to pursue peace in that relationship instead of retaliation. God pursues peace with us, doesn't seek to retaliate against us. We are supposed to be peacemakers. We are those who take forgiveness seriously. We forgive one another. We forgive those outside of these walls when they show up and they protest the building of transitional housing, right? We forgive. But we also need to know that we're forgiven too. And I think the most important aspect of that for me has become this recognition that in acknowledging this forgiveness, it's not necessarily for the sake of gaining a heavenly reward, but for receiving that support of God now. Because the mistakes we've made can crush us, and we need help carrying those. I hope that as you go out and about throughout the rest of the month of October, that when you make mistakes, you can allow yourself to be forgiven. And that when you bump up against folks who've also made mistakes, you can forgive them. And when you're about to give up hope, when you're thinking, I don't know, I've messed up so huge, is there any grace left for me? You remember that there's an unending fount of it. Keep showing up. And if you need a reminder, please feel free to knock on my door, okay?